Hello, everyone. My name is Bella. Welcome to my channel. And today I want to talk about a classic horror story which came out in July on Netflix. So, first, I will start out with a non spoiler section and then I'll go into spoilers. And I'll warn you before it moves to the spoiler section. First, to just give you a little summary. This is a horror movie. It's Italian. You can watch it either dubbed in English or in Italian with subtitles, which is how I watched it. This is one of those movies that I think is better for you to go into blind. I prefer that with a lot of things, movies and books. I kind of prefer that usually, but I think it's especially important here. And I'm going to leave this pretty vague for the non-spoiler section, but basically there's this group of strangers that carpool together. They get into a car accident and then they wake up stranded somewhere and have to find a way out. So I definitely think this was a unique horror movie. I always love when they attempt to do something original. It might not land with everybody, but at least they had some creativity. They aren't following some boring formula. I liked it, and there are multiple twists that I thought were interesting. I think it's paced really well. It doesn't rush, but there also wasn't ever a dull moment for me. There definitely are some gory scenes. They don't leave very much to the imagination, but there aren't too many scenes like this. There wasn't much of it. There's just a few really gruesome, heavy scenes. But I think it makes good use of these scenes. They're really effective, the ones that they do have. It's not overdone. And while the rest of the movie doesn't have these really heavy scenes, there is still this mystery and suspense that keeps it intense and gloomy, and there are just other horror elements throughout. I'm not a huge cinematography nerd at all. I honestly don't quite understand it, just to be honest. But I just thought the movie was visually appealing. I guess you would call it the color grading, and I thought some of the sets and shots were really iconic and memorable. This movie isn't getting the best reviews, and I don't really understand it. I don't really get why. I don't think it hits you over the head with anything. I think the scares are pretty good. I think it looks good, the acting is good, the effects are good. I think the story is interesting and unique. Was it my favorite horror movie? No, but it wasn't disappointing, and I do think it was very memorable. And just another non-spoiler tidbit that I wanted to talk about was that Will Merrick is in this movie. I loved that. This is an Italian movie, so I wasn't expecting to recognize anyone. That is something that is kind of off-putting for me about foreign films, is that I never recognize anyone, so it becomes a little bland and unmemorable for me. So for me, it was a treat to see someone that I recognized. I recognize him from Skins Cycle 3, so if there's any other Skins fans out there, there's just a little Easter egg for you in this movie. So that's all I can really say non-spoiler wise. So now we're going to get into the spoiler section. So first I'll go a little bit more into detail about what happened, but it's not going to be like a full point by point summary. It's just kind of the important bits. So it opens up to a woman that is bloody and tied down, and then a person comes in with a big hammer, and you can guess what's about to happen. And then we move over to our main character, Elisa, who is waiting at a diner. She's waiting to be picked up by a kind of carpool service. She's pregnant and she's talking to her mom on the phone about getting an abortion. Her ride comes, so she takes off with them. They're in an RV that's driven by this man, Fabrizio, and there's also a doctor, Ricardo, and two average TikTokers, Mark and Sophia. Along the way, Mark ends up driving the RV and they crash into a tree. They wake up in the middle of a field with no road in sight. Mark is hurt and they splint his leg. There's a house slash church looking building nearby, but they don't see anyone inside. Ricardo and Fabrizio wander off to try and find the road. Elisa eventually sees the door to the building is open and goes inside to investigate. She finds pictures of people in masks, and she finds this type of shrine room. Meanwhile, Ricardo and Fabrizio wander across a pig sacrifice. Everyone eventually comes into the shrine room that's in the building, everyone except Mark, since he can't walk. And Fabrizio tells everyone about the legend or fable of this ritual. And they decide that they're going to leave the next day and get help for Mark. So they go to sleep in the RV. Fabrizio goes out to pee and he sees some of these masked people, the cult members. And the rest of them who are in the RV, they hear screams and they go to the house to investigate. Fabrizio comes back and convinces them to hide in the attic. And up there they find a little girl with no tongue, and her name is Chiara, and she's being kept in this kind of cage. And through the window they see the cult members take Mark inside the house, and they strap him to a table, and we'll just say they kill him. And the next morning, everyone downstairs is gone. They escape with a little girl and they start walking through the woods. They find this car graveyard from all the previous victims, and they continue walking, but they somehow arrive back at the clearing as if they had just walked in a circle, but now the RV is gone. So they decide to stay in the house. They talk for a bit and eventually they go to sleep. When Elisa wakes up, Ricardo, Sophia, and Chiara are captured by the cult members outside. Fabrizio pulls Elisa back into the house and they watch them perform the ritual on Ricardo and Sophia. Elisa realizes that they must have been drugged from the beer that they drank, so she starts to realize that Fabrizio must be in on it. She gets close to him and she hears people talking to him through an earpiece, and he gets mad at her and he tells the cult members to take her. And she wakes up with her hands nailed down to a chair. The mayor is there and she says she's taking care of everybody. And then she's taken to this room where she sees that everything is being filmed. She finds out that Fabrizio is making this kind of snuff film for the black market, and she breaks out of the chair and walks around the sets, and she finds Fabrizio talking to Chiara about the movie and how they're going to make it work since some things haven't gone according to plan. So she kills them both and has it recorded for the movie. And then she escapes through the forest. She comes across a boy and follows him to the beach. Everyone is shocked by her appearance and records her as she goes into the water. And then at the very end, there's also this kind of meta bit where people are watching the movie on Bloodflix and commenting and rating it. So, to get into some of my more specific thoughts about the movie, I'm always a fan of a twist. I like mysteries, and I just think it keeps things really interesting. So I definitely knew of some of the twists. I could see some of them coming, but I didn't see all of them coming. I think most of them make sense, but some I have a few problems with, which I will get into. I knew from the very beginning that Fabrizio was in on it. I could tell that. And I think that they might have made that obvious on purpose. So you kind of think you're smart for knowing what's about to happen. And then they throw another twist or another twist and another twist on top of that so that you get extra shocked and surprised because you thought you knew what was going to happen because you were on to the first twist. But so the movie starts out at the house with the woman that's about to be offed and someone hiding and looking through the peephole. So we know a little bit about what's about to happen over the course of the movie. So you start out a little skeptical. So when we are transported to the other scene where the RV carpool is picking Elisa up and Fabrizio is recording everyone and he says something like, "Talk more, I need my audience to like you." That was red flag number one. He's driving them, so obviously he can lead them to whatever area the killers are at. And then when they're in this ritual room, shrine room, whatever you want to call it, he somehow knows this story about the ritual and the three leaders, I forget their names. And just multiple times he's the one that's leading them to try to walk out of the forest. And the first time he's with Ricardo and they just never find the road and then they turn back. And then the second time he's leading them and they magically just go in a circle and they end up back where they started. So obviously at that point, I knew for sure that he was in on it. And I guess the second twist is that it's a movie, that this is all being filmed for a movie. And it gets a little confusing, so I think I'm going to so the movie that we watch, A Classic Horror Story, that's kind of the primary movie, and then there's a movie within the movie, so I'll call that the secondary movie. So I had some inkling of an idea that there was a movie being filmed because of the weird lighting that would come on at certain times. So it would everything would be red and the whole outside would be red and you could see lighting rigs in the trees. And then the little girl character, Kiara, she said it's not a forest. And the movie is slightly self-aware, like the title, A Classic Horror Story, and Fabrizio making comments about horror movies. So all of that made me think that it was some kind of movie, but I wasn't sure how or, how those details came together. And there's probably multiple other twists that I could talk about, but the main other one is that Chiara is Fabrizio's sister and that she's in on this whole operation. And this is the one, I definitely didn't see this one coming, and I also don't think this one fully makes sense. So if I had to categorize this movie, I would call it a satanic cult horror movie. For some reason, these kind of cult movies really affect me. And I think it's because it's scary to me that this huge group of people that they're able to commit these types of atrocities. Because I think we would like to think that it's just a few outliers, it's just a few crazy people. But for these kind of cult movies, when it's this whole group does this, or it's a whole town that's in on it, that really gets me. So that's definitely a factor here that affects how much of a scare you're going to get. So, it depends on if you like paranormal movies or what kind of horror movies are more effective for you. But I personally am more scared by realistic movies. I think it's more realistic for a cult to exist rather than paranormal or an alien or an evil clown or an evil doll. So this type of thing is scarier for me. And also, I really like learning about the cult's beliefs or their religion or their customs and why they do what they do. It adds a little bit of mystery to it that keeps things more interesting for me. I do think they could have went into the belief system a little bit more or explained it a little bit more, because I think they kind of mention everything once and that's it. So it's a little hard to catch on. So, I mean, I do think that it gets, for me personally anyway, I think it gets a little bit confusing, just a tad bit confusing about how the mayor relates to the mafia and this secondary film, and I just would have liked to learn more about the cult. So I think that this movie has some messages, some themes to it, which I always appreciate. So I want to talk about that a little bit more. It's definitely a little bit hard for me to analyze stuff. I really love learning about the deeper meaning to things, but it's definitely harder for me to figure things out. So I'd love to, have a conversation with you guys and learn things, and you can tell me what you thought. But I thought the ending was a little bit confusing in terms of messaging, but I could tell that there was something deeper that they're trying to get at with it, with like the people with their phones out and just the whole meta-ness of the movie. But I couldn't really figure it out. So from what I can find, it's kind of a commentary about people's bloodlust, that people at the end are more fascinated with watching the show rather than helping Elisa, which proves Fabrizio's point that people are desperate for these types of black market movies. And then to go even more meta with it, there's the end where people are commenting on the secondary film and reviewing it, and someone just skips along 2 parts of the movie and then they dislike it, presumably because the girl doesn't die at the end, which reinforces this bloodlust theory. And I think that it has something to do with this thing in our brain that wants us to go, it makes us want to go further and further. You get addicted to things and then you need more and more of that thing to get the same adrenaline rush. So I think it's commenting on that too. Like, how far are you going to go? Because you're always going to need more and more, and you're already at this extreme end of the spectrum. So to me, the whole movie blurs the line between what's reality and what is the movie, the secondary movie. So they're out in the real world, but they've built these sets and set up these light rigs, and some of the characters in the movie are real people, some of them are actors. Fabrizio has this story he wants to tell with the torture scenes that it's this fake story, but it's real torture on real people. And then at the end, Elisa breaks out of the movie set and into the real world with real people, but she's had these real traumas that were part of a fake story. It's a little confusing, but hopefully that makes sense. But at the end, she's still being filmed like she's in her own movie. It's almost Truman Show-esque to me, and hopefully that that makes it make sense a little more. But I appreciate that this movie, it stands well on its own. Everything makes sense on the surface. Like, it's entertaining on a surface level, but then you can try to analyze it a bit deeper and then kind of get a deeper appreciation for it. So I have some specific problems with the movie, some things that don't match up, some questions. So this is, really, I want to hear what you guys have to say, because I'm hoping some of you have some answers for me for some of these points. But so the first one is that the whole movie is kind of a comparison and commentary on horror movies, So, I mean, the movie is called A Classic Horror Story, so you go into it expecting it to be self-aware or making fun of tropes or playing with expectations or parodying horror movies, and it does some of these things like a few times. The biggest thing I think that they do here is how meta it is. So it's a horror movie about a horror movie being filmed. So there is commentary there about how to formulate a story or how to carry things through or how to satisfy an audience. But I don't think that they went far enough with the comparison or commentary on horror movies for my taste. Like, I would expect it to be something like Scream, where they play with stereotypes of what usually happens in horror movies and they play with your expectations. So, based on previous horror movies, you would think it would go this way when actually it goes the other way. Or if a classic horror story doesn't go that route, I would at least think that it would do something else, like do some kind of commentary or critique of horror movie trends. So a lot of the stuff felt kind of half thought out to me. So, for example, they mentioned one or two times like something like, oh, this is like a setup for a horror movie. This is so Sam Raimi. But they don't really call out stuff like that any other time. There are some bits that are playing off of tropes of horror movies, like the cast of victims. Like, we have the final girl, we have the nerdy lame guy, the blonde girl, the class clown rude guy that gets them into trouble, and then there's the hotshot leader guy. And they have this cast of characters that reflects horror movie tropes, but I don't really see any purpose to this, any commentary on this, like reversing it so that the final girl isn't actually the final girl, for example. Or another example of a trope they could have played with is the trope of people doing dumb things in horror movies. Like, we have all seen the horror movie where they go outside by themselves, they split up, they leave their cell phone behind, they don't grab a weapon. And they didn't really do anything to play with this idea at all, at least as far as I could tell. And another thing I would expect them to do here is maybe copy other horror movies, as in like in an homage kind of way, like leave little Easter eggs that horror movie fans would notice and appreciate. And it does seem like this was intended, that they were trying to copy other horror movies, because they say multiple times in this movie that the secondary movie is a copycat movie. Fabrizio anticipates that people are going to call his movie a copycat movie, and then people at the end, when they're commenting on Bloodflix about the secondary film, they say that it's a copy of other movies. But I don't really see any homages or Easter eggs from other movies. The only movie I can draw a comparison to is Midsommar, and there are a lot of similarities there. There's just the kind of basic idea of it being a cult that sacrifices innocent people, the daytime horror, this dinner scene, the disfigured boy, and then the way the cult members imitate the main girl. It's way too similar that I feel like it had to be on purpose. And like I said earlier, they talk about how it's supposed to be a copycat movie. So I think it would have just made a lot more sense if they had included more elements and Easter eggs from other well-known horror movies. Another question I have is, why did they kill off Mark? And maybe they explained this and I missed it, but I think usually with these types of cult movies, there's usually a reason for why the killers make certain decisions. The reason here is that these cult members are killing off these people as part of a snuff film, so the secondary film. But the secondary film has this elaborate storyline and world building. So in this secondary film, there is a backstory to the cult. They worship these three gods, or whatever they are, and they perform these rituals. but Mark didn't seem to be involved in any of these rituals. Of course, they're just going to kill anyone for the secondary film, but I just didn't see how it was integrated into the secondary film's storyline. And again, it's easy to draw a comparison here to Midsummer. So in Midsummer, there's the one guy he's the class clown, he's the fool character, and they steal his face, and then there's the guy that wears the bear skin. So there's all these roles that the victims play in this ritual, and each person that dies in that movie was killed for a specific purpose of the ritual. So I'm trying to figure out how Mark fits into the secondary film's storyline. And another problem I had with this was Kiara's character. So the twist of Kiara being in on it, and she's Fabrizio's sister, and she's an actor. This twist obviously had to happen for the primary story because it acts as a trigger for making Elisa furious and for her killing off Fabrizio. If Elisa hadn't found out that Kiara was in on it, I could see her just leaving the set and escaping, not necessarily wanting to take revenge out on Fabrizio, but because she had this motherly connection to Kiara, it stung extra bad that she was in on it too. So it makes a more rewarding ending for her to end the secondary movie on her own terms and get revenge. So here's where my problem with it comes in. I don't think it makes sense for this role in the secondary film to be played by an actor. They're filming a film for the black market. They're killing and torturing people in real life. So why would they have this one character in it that's being fake tortured? That doesn't really make sense. Every other character there is being killed for real, so why wouldn't they just get some other random girl and kill her for real? I would understand it more if they needed her for the story, like if they needed someone on the inside to be there to guide the victims around and move them along to each part of the story that they need to hit. But they didn't need her for that because they had Fabrizio. The girl didn't really serve any purpose other than pulling on Elisa's heartstrings. And there also was that one part where Elisa asks Kiara how to get out of the forest. And then Kiara writes in the diary, she writes that it's not a forest. Why would she say that? Why would she give Elisa that hint if at the end she's in on the whole thing? I really just can't make sense of that at all. So I do have some problems with the movie. There's some things that don't make sense, some things that I think that they could have elaborated on, but I think these problems were pretty minor. I think they could have gone further with the commentary, but I'm glad that there was at least a little bit of message there. There was something deeper that they were attempting. I think I'm kind of done with horror movies that are really just slashers with no deeper meaning there at all. And I mean, I thought it was entertaining and unique, and I'm really glad I gave this one a try. So I want to know, have you seen a classic horror story? What did you think? Did you like it? What were your favorite scenes or scares? Were you surprised by any of the twists? And I'd especially like to know if you have any answers for the elements that I was confused by. So let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!